Have you ever heard of a plan that's designed to win, even if it loses? Well, today we're diving into a fascinating analysis from columnist Shankar Iyer about a high-stakes Supreme Court case that feels like just that. A political and legal strategy so well-crafted, it's almost foolproof. Let's get into it. So here is the setup. There's a huge Supreme Court ruling on the horizon, one that could totally upend years of U.S. trade policy. But what if one side has played their cards so well that the final verdict, well, it almost doesn't matter? That's the puzzle we're going to unpack. And this quote from Shankar Iyer really lays it all out. Donald J. Trump is planning on winning even if he loses the court case. It sounds like a paradox, right? How is that even possible? Well, that's the core of the strategy we're about to break down. Now, to really get a sense of the stakes here, you have to follow the money. We're talking about over $150 billion in tariffs that have already been collected. If the court rules the wrong way, it could trigger what Iyer describes as a massive refund crisis. All that cash would have to be paid back. So yeah, the stakes are absolutely enormous. This is where Ayer's analysis uses a really powerful metaphor. He compares the whole strategy to a casino. You know the old saying, right? The house always wins. The idea is to build a system with so many backup plans and alternative routes that no single court ruling can actually take the house down. Okay, so to understand how you build a house that never loses, we need to get into the legal weeds just a little bit. It all comes down to one specific law that was used in a pretty controversial and, frankly, unprecedented way. And this is it, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA for short. It's from 1977, and it gives the president some serious power in an emergency. But here's the kicker that Iyer points out. In the nearly 50 years this law has been on the books, no president had ever used it to slap these kinds of sweeping worldwide tariffs on imports. That's what makes this case such a big deal. So the whole legal battle, which comes from the case Learning Resources, Inc. versus Donald J. Trump, boils down to this. On one side, you have the petitioners arguing that, hey, the Constitution is super clear. Congress sets tariffs. They say IEPEA is for stuff like sanctions, not for this. But the administration's argument is that the law's language, specifically regulate importation, is broad enough to give them the power to do this, especially when they've declared an emergency. And there's another legal concept floating around in all this called the major questions doctrine. It basically says that if a government agency is going to make a decision with huge economic and political consequences, Congress needs to have given them that power very, very clearly. So the question for the court is, was Congress clear enough here? The petitioners are saying absolutely not. So, if the court agrees with the petitioners and says using IEPA was a no-go, what happens then? Well, this is where Shankar Ayer's reporting on the Game 2 plan comes into play. It turns out there's already a backup plan, fully loaded and ready to fire. And this quote from the Treasury Secretary, wow, it really says it all, doesn't it? It just oozes confidence. The message seems to be that no matter what 9 justices decide, the overall policy is going to continue one way or another. This one court case is just a bump in the road. And here is that Game 2 playbook. Iyer calls it a parade of options, and you can see why. It's not just one alternative, it's a whole menu. They could use Section 122 for a big blanket tariff, or they could get more specific with Sections 232, 301, and 338 to go after certain imports or countries. It's a multi-pronged attack plan. And get this. These aren't just some half-baked ideas sketched out on a napkin. According to Iyer's reporting, these plans are pre-baked. The investigations are queued up. The timelines are already drawn out. This is strategic planning, not a last-minute scramble. Okay, so with all that in mind, what is the Supreme Court likely to do? They're in a tough spot. They know that a simple, sweeping ruling could throw the economy into chaos, so they have a few different paths they could take. Iyer really boils it down to 3 main possibilities. You've got the jackpot win for the administration, where everything is upheld. Then there's the total strike down, which would trigger that $150 billion refund crisis. Or there's a third way, a more nuanced off-ramp, where the court signals it's not okay with how things were done, but tries to avoid causing a complete meltdown. And here are a couple of examples of what those off-ramps could look like. The court could basically toss the problem over to Congress and say, you guys need to authorize this explicitly. Or they could use a fancy legal tool called remand without vacatur. That's essentially the court saying, look, you did this the wrong way, but we'll let the tariff stand for now while you go back and redo it under a different, more appropriate law. And that brings us right back to the central theme from Shankar Iyer's column. When you have a main plan, a detailed game too, and even the court is looking for ways to avoid a direct confrontation, well, it really starts to feel like the House can't lose. IR closes his piece with this fantastic quote from Dwight Eisenhower. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And honestly, it's the perfect way to sum this all up. The specific plan, using IEPA, might get shot down. But the planning, having backups for your backups, that's where the real power lies. So this leaves us with a really big and frankly pretty heavy question. When a Supreme Court ruling is viewed not as a final judgment, but just as another hurdle to plan around, what does that do to the whole idea of checks and balances? What happens to the separation of powers when one branch is so prepared that the outcome of the game hardly seems to matter? That's definitely something worth thinking about.